Welcome to App Talk with Upptic, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of how to grow apps and games. We speak with industry experts about specific strategies, tools, and tactics they use to find success, and we keep you up to date with emerging news and trends in the ever-changing games, marketing, and technology ecosystem. My name is Xander Acosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic, and joining me today are my co-host,
Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic.
And our guest,
Rafael Vivas, the GM of Vessel and New Initiatives, and one of the founding employees of AppLovin.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Raf.
Yeah, Raf, we're really excited to have you on. We've been following Vessel closely since kind of the stealth launch of it. And you guys are digging into so many of the topics and questions that we have about sort of the state of the industry and this sector and crossover between traditional gaming and Web3. So we're super excited to just devote the whole episode to a deep dive into this with you. How are you guys holding up, by the way? I know everything's been friggin' insane in anyone working in things related to Web3 or crypto the last week. How are you guys doing?
Yes, so we're doing well. I think one thing that's been really helpful for us is that what our really focus is being a digital marketplace for digital assets and items. And that's our core mission. So I actually don't put us in the crypto bucket or the Web3 bucket, really for two reasons. One, we don't transact in cryptocurrencies at all, because our main goal, being on the App Store, to be compliant, that's just not allowed. And two, really focus on ease of use. So, when you look at a lot of the other crypto products out there, having to connect your MetaMask wallet on desktop and then having to sync it with your phone and going through all these steps, when you go on Vessel, it's simple as just logging in via your email and you get right into it. So I would put us more in just the digital marketplace bucket, more of like a Steam marketplace, but for mobile games and apps.
Yeah,
Right.
It makes sense. And that's one thing I try to keep reminding people about, like working in our sector, just like regular people in the industry, is there's a big difference between kind of the speculative financial and token-based aspects of things related to blockchain and crypto, and the underlying technology and the way that you can use this technology to enhance gaming and platform experiences. And I just try to keep reminding myself to keep myself saying that, kind of our thesis on how Web3 technology can evolve gaming has very little to do with the events of the last week, with everything related to FTX fallout. And we're not going to go deep on that in this podcast. I mean, just go on Twitter and it's changing every 5 minutes. So, what's the point? But a lot of these actions of the past week, I think, ultimately come down to bad actors and greed and very human things at the end of the day, and very unrelated to the opportunities that Web3 and ownable assets bring to gaming. Xander, how are you holding up? Just checking with you too.
Yeah, I mean, aside from BlockFi melting down and losing money there, I feel pretty reasonably good. Yeah, I mean, I think none of the core assumptions that we made around gaming are changing. What we're seeing is, I guess, a second wave of flushing out of the ecosystem of people who were really focused on finances. I mean, I'll say this. The FTX meltdown is terrible for crypto and everyone associated with it.
Right.
Just in that, the smell that used to come from NFTs is now that's going to come from the entire ecosystem is drastically enhanced. And that's just no good. And then additionally, regulation is coming now, on whether or not we want it to. And I think that's a scary reality. Yeah.
Well, I would argue that, it probably will affect the whole ecosystem for better or for worse, but we've explicitly found a glaring weak point of centralized exchanges and kind of those as on-ramps to Web3. And Raf, I know you had a thought. I think we cut you off.
Yeah, I think, the regulation was going to come either way.
True.
And I also think that this is a natural evolution. I think anytime you see these new technologies come out, there's some really bad actors. And what ends up happening is, they grow and learn from there. And so I think this is a short-term pain, but something that's going to be better for the ecosystem in the long term. I'm seeing a lot of exchanges out there, like Crypto.com, like Coinbase, go out there, show their reserves on chain, show their liabilities. And I think that is definitely the path forward to make sure that you don't end up in another FTX/SBF situation.
Yeah. Coinbase really came out looking like some really intelligent people in this whole thing. We did it the right way, and look, we're not melting down. I didn't realize that was the barometer that we're measuring people by, but I mean,
we'll see. I agree with you, Xander, but I mean, there's other institutions such as Genesis, which is, the kind of the bigger arm that is backing lending platforms like Gemini, And they were seen as one of kind of the rock solid institutions, and they just froze withdrawals today. So it's sort of like everything's fine until the second that it's not. And
Right.
I think it's definitely a moment of peak fear. I also believe that Coinbase is, I mean, hopefully we don't regret these words, that Coinbase seems to be one of the, really solid, good actors. But, I think the next few weeks, there's going to be more dominoes to fall for sure.
Well, didn't we say BlockFi was going to be fine last week, and then like basically 24 hours later, it froze withdrawals?
Exactly. The curse, the Upptic curse.
By the way, I know we have a lot more to go over, but real quick here, did anyone feel like when that news came out about FTX that it was fake at first or a hoax? I mean, it was so crazy. I mean, this guy was looked at like the messiah of crypto, like a guy who could do no harm. And as we've seen probably over the past weekend and over the past almost 2 weeks now, it completely 180 from what we thought it was.
Yeah. No, if it was fiction, people wouldn't believe it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I mean, go ahead, Xander.
So they're just the people those are the people who you always got to see, like, what if you're too good to be true, you probably are. And I think that's sort of a lesson we're relearning for the 20th time. Yeah, well, I think it makes sense to pivot to the new our main topic. We're gonna talk about Vessel, and we'll sprinkle a little AppLovin in there. I think AppLovin is like basically one of the first topics we ever talked about on the Talk with Upptic podcast, and it's basically been a throughput of all our conversations for quite some time. And we want to have you guys on the podcast for basically since the beginning. So I'm really, really happy that it is finally happening. Just sort of jump, I think like the throughput from this entire conversation will be sort of mobile Web3 and mobile games in the context of Vessel by AppLovin. That's sort of what I'm thinking about. But like for the people who might not necessarily know what AppLovin is, Raf, can you give us a quick history of AppLovin and sort of a summary of its core, what it's done historically, and what are sort of a summary of its core businesses? Because there's a couple different ones.
Sure. AppLovin is one of the largest mobile platforms out there. We got our claim to fame through building an ad network from zero to building it to a multi-billion-dollar business. And along the way, we went ahead and effectively extended our offering. So we got into game publishing, which I started over at AppLovin doing Lion Studios. We went and acquired studios that had great content, and we went and focused on growing those. And then along that journey as well, we went to go acquire tools that could help our developers run their businesses better, right? And so that would be companies like Adjust. And then also new mediums, which I would say is CTV through Whirl.
Right. And, take it together, I think AppLovin, it's either AppLovin or Unity, has the most holistic set of tools for game publishers ever. They have a game development platform, which is really hard to compete with. But if you sort of strike that from the record, AppLovin basically has tooling that allows a publisher to solve close to any of its needs. And I think that's one of the interesting and scary things about the AppLovin verticalization business model, is just that how holistic it is as an offering.
It's been really interesting to watch the growth path. And as Xander said, I mean, part of why we've been tracking AppLovin so much since we started the podcast is you guys have been in the news like just about every month with some major move or some new way of evolving the business. And as me, who's someone who's been working in mobile UA since the early 2010s, it's been very interesting to see AppLovin evolve from what at the onset was more like a traditional ad network to almost more like I would say, up until recently, a mobile gaming ETF of different complementary services. Mm-hmm. And now, as we're going to dig into with Web3, an expansion of even beyond mobile. I think a platform is a reasonable way to describe AppLovin, but it is quite a unique combination of complementary services and business units at this point. And I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of unpack how Web3 folds into that.
And one thing I wanted to touch on at Xander's side, so AppLovin, the reason why you're scared of it or fear it, I think there's assumed truth and then there's real truth. And so like assumed truth is that AppLovin has everyone's data. AppLovin is a competitor in the content business. Actual truth, through offering and growing our businesses and increasing our offering, we've actually helped grow game businesses larger, right? We've added a lot more ad supply into the market. We've improved our ad technology that allows advertisers to buy more profitably at larger scale. And so I think when you look at what has AppLovin actually brought to the market versus these headlines and these articles that people write, I think what you'll end up seeing is we've done a lot more good to the market than we've done actual harm. And I think as long as we stay on that path and we continue proving it over years to come, I think that we and the industry are going to be in a great position.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the thing that is, it's just it's still, regardless of the truth, it is a scary. It's always scary to go up against a giant behemoth. And as you guys continue to grow, I think people will accurately look at you with wary eye. Now, to be clear, we're AppLovin customers. We spend a lot of money on AppLovin, and we've used the majority of their products. We use Adjust. We use basically everything. And it's some of the best in market. But I think I've always been skeptical of we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's a zero. Well, I don't know. Capitalism is often seen as a zero-sum game, and there is at least some truth to that.
Well, I mean, I think the broader theme here is just consolidation in mobile, and it's not just AppLovin doing it. We've seen this, as you mentioned, Xander, with the Unity, Iron Source, and Friends conglomeration too. And it seems like, Raph, I'd love just your take on this. Like, is that a trend before we go deeper into Vessel specifically? Do you think we'll continue to see like this consolidation trend in the mobile marketing and mobile gaming ecosystem in the current financial conditions?
100%. I think right now the blood's in the waters. You got a lot of companies that were burning cash before and were able to raise money no problem because effectively interest rates were close to zero. Now we live in a whole completely different time. And so the people who are extremely profitable are going to go out there and going to be buyers in the market. And so I think you're going to see definitely a lot more consolidation occur.
Cool. So awesome. I want to pivot the conversation a bit to Vessel specifically. And can you just talk a bit about what Vessel is and then how it sort of fits into the AppLovin verticalization strategy that we've just been discussing? Sure.
So I'm actually going to start with something different. Let's talk about how did Vessel, come, right? Like, how did we actually decide to do this? So, a little background. I took a sabbatical between building Lion and now Vessel, and my sabbatical really meant just go build stuff that I found was fun. And I went and I actually built a Web3 game. And when I went through that process of building a Web3 game, and I used Stardust and we used we were on Polygon. A lot of these tools out there, they were not intuitive. They were slow. They just, for a user to actually onboard onto the game, it was an extremely poor user experience. And one thing that really stood out to me is that we looked at like the registration funnel of users who actually set up their wallet and deposit, and we saw like very low single-digit % of users actually be able to get to the flow. Yeah. And in gaming, if like, especially in like hyper casual where I come from, if you don't have like 80% of users getting past like level 1, throw that out the door, right? That game isn't going to make it. And so off the bat, we're like, okay, there's obviously something massive here, right? We see this billion-dollar industry happening in Web3, and in mobile, there's no offering for this. And the people who are trying to build offerings for this, they actually have very little context on how to make it as seamless for the user because they never built games before, and they're just effectively copying and pasting what they've seen on web. And so Adam and I had a conversation about that, and he goes, completely agree. And that's effectively when we started to go and say, okay, there's something here. Let's go start building Vessel. Yeah,
now, Raph, I think that's a really important point. Like, onboarding is to me like the #1 problem with Web3 gaming today. Like a lot of Web3 gaming companies kind of have it backwards, where they use the blockchain and NFT aspects of it to put increased gates before you can start having the fun, which is the complete like antithesis of free to play, which is like make it as streamlined as possible, get to the fun as soon as possible. So yeah, extremely aligned on sort of that pain point.
Exactly. And also one other stat to kind of share that I saw from my game, and I think a lot of Web3 games saw this, is that the people who are investing the most money don't even play your game. They actually are speculators who are buying these assets and waiting for you to grow the user base and then kind of drop those assets onto new players and effectively being predatory. Where Vessel's focus was a marketplace for gamers, right? And so these items could be transacted amongst the user base in a way that actually allows the game to still be economically viable for people to play. Like imagine, I think a good example is, imagine if we were playing Call of Duty, right? And I had to buy an M4. If an M4 is $1, no big deal, right? But based on the way that Web3 was going, or these NFT games are going, it's effectively such a small DAU, and you have so much capital being pumped into them that just to get that M4 would be $1,000. Like that's not realistic. The everyday, I don't care what anyone says. The everyday consumer does not have that type of money to throw, especially in these economic times. And so that was really just, for us, we wanted to tackle it a different way. We knew there was a better way to tackle this for gamers.
Yeah, that's
right?
a great point too. The unit economics of Web3 native games are so backwards. I mean, because the adoption is still so low. If you throw out outliers like Axie, I mean, especially in recent months, you're basically your maximum addressable audience, if you're lucky, is like tens of thousands of users, and that's if you're very fortunate. So yeah, you don't get those economies of scale. Like the entire player base for many of these games is acquired in a single day for even moderately successful mobile games, which allows different scale of economies.
That's actually hilarious. I bet there's so many times you hear Web3 developers say like, "Oh, we've got like 10,000 DAU." You're like, "Oh man, I acquired that many installs today."
Yeah. So I have a lot of ways I want to interrogate Vessel. There's some really interesting stuff as how it fits into the ecosystem. But first I kind of want to set the table. And can you like explain like just to people who have no idea what Vessel is, like what are the features of Vessel and how does it work for AppLovin and how does it work for potential customers who will come to AppLovin, developers who come to AppLovin and want to use it?
Maybe
Sure.
we start from the customer perspective first. So if someone goes and downloads Vessel on the App Store today, how should they think about it and what's their experience going to be like?
Sure. So Vessel is a digital marketplace for items and other assets as well. And effectively, as a consumer, you would go on there, and let's say your favorite game has Vessel. You would go Vessel Marketplace integrated into it. You would go download Vessel and buy the items that you want, right? These would be purchased via IAP, and then you would have the capability to use them inside of your favorite game. That is the way that a consumer thinks about Vessel.
So to be clear, do the games then have to exist within Vessel, or do they exist? Are they other apps that then just integrate with Vessel and you're able to pull in the asset from Vessel into these other apps?
The latter. So the apps effectively use Vessel. The games are not within Vessel.
Right. And that's, I think one thing we really want to explore, and Raf, we've chatted about this, is it's clear that your team like really did your research as far as like compliance with Apple policy. And we've seen some other apps that are in the Web3 space that are maybe skirting or in clear violation of Apple's like, no app stores within the App Store policy. So yeah, I think it's good to clarify that these are standalone apps. And that Vessel is kind of a unifying piece to trade these items between those apps.
Correct.
So I think you just sort of hinted at it, Warren, but let's be very clear and lay this out. Can you explain your understanding of what the mobile policy, platform policies are, specifically Apple and Google, as it relates to NFTs, and how that informed the decision you made to design Vessel the ways that you did?
Yeah. So my understanding in layman terms of the Apple policy is that NFTs must be available via in-app purchase, right? And so with that, we said, okay, we're going to release a virtual currency, Vessel Coin, which people then can go purchase through the in-app store and then go and purchase the NFTs. And so that's exactly why we went down that route. And we felt like also, while everyone else was trying to skirt the Apple 30% and Google 30%, we felt that there was such a massive opportunity working with these platforms. We built our business on top of them. There's $120 billion plus in-app purchase market across the both of them. And so the idea of adding a resale market for these digital items and working with these platforms seemed to us to be a massive opportunity and one that we're focused on.
And if I can give a little more context there, Raf, and please correct me if any of this is wrong. So, my understanding and experience when we were testing out Vessel was it's a pretty novel but intuitive way to work around this Apple policy. So the virtual currency in Vessel is, I want to use language carefully here, but it's essentially anchored to US dollar. So a dollar of, and what's the name of the token? Is it?
Not token, but virtual.
Not token. Excuse
coin.
me.
Yeah. Vessel coin. And effectively, right. it's every Vessel is 1 penny. Right. That's what the conversion comes out to.
So from a user experience, I kind of make it akin to like buying tokens in arcade. So you when you come into the ecosystem, if you buy $1 in the virtual currency, you're paying that Apple tax upfront. You can then use this inside the arcade. You're not having to pay that transaction fee every time. You've kind of paid it on the gate in. And then when a user decides to cash out their virtual currency, you've paid that tax on the way in, but you're not paying it again on the way out. So you're essentially, to really oversimplify, you're essentially getting 70 cents for $1 of purchase in order to honor Apple's guidelines and policies, and this allows you to kind of have a large amount of freedom once you've paid that tax on the way in to interact with the ecosystem. Anything that you would modify or correct from that?
No, 100%. That's right. And I think from the outsider, people who don't play games on their phone, they say, oh, wow, like you're giving 30 cents to the App Store. But the ecosystem that we live in today is you get zero back, right? That's like in 2022, if I told you, hey, I'm going to go buy a Toyota Corolla. And in 2023, I want to go and resell my Toyota Corolla. And they say, the car manufacturer says, hey, you can't actually sell it. I'd be like, what the hell? That's insane. And so the capability to get some value out, we think is transformative, and it actually also allows for new gameplay experiences.
Right. So I think that's an interesting thing to talk about. So there's sort of two parts of this. I want to start with how do you see this evolving NFTs and web? I guess, are these technically NFTs? They are in Vessel?
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So the way that I frame it to our team internally, and the way I've talked about it is that, so the digital items are NFTs.
Right.
We look at NFTs as really as an evolution of a traditional digital item. So like
right.
For Xander, let's say you and I play World of Warcraft. For you to see that I've got items, you need to go log into the game. I need to meet you one place, and you need to inspect me to make sure that I have what I say I have.
Right.
The beauty is with NFTs, and this is where I think that's valuable, is that I can go on the blockchain, look up your address, and see all the assets you own, right? And that proves that digital ownership. And I think that is great, and that's the part of the blockchain that we're using,
right?
Specifically,
as opposed to and then this is sort of the premise I've had for what Web3 games should be for a long time, which is that you use the blockchain for the asset, but the fact that every game is now minting their own token, the reason we're doing that is because Axie did that, it seems like to me. And that doesn't seem like something that is scalable over the long period of time, because not everything we're seeing now is explaining, with the market crashing, like with FTT and FTX, is explaining why that phenomenon probably doesn't make sense over the long arc of history. I do sort of want to flip this on its head, though. One of the things that's really interesting about Web3 technology is its decentralization and how we are able to do interoperability across games in a way that we're not able to do now. I assume your answer to this is, well, within the Vessel ecosystem, you're able to do interoperability. Do you see that over the long arc of history being a net negative to game development, or is it fine to say this is the mobile solution and that's what we're doing, and we don't care about the fact that maybe you're not going to take this to your Switch later on or whatever? I mean, obviously that's exaggeration.
Yeah. So regarding interoperability, I think it all depends on how it's used. So like a cool idea that we've been bouncing around internally is like, imagine if, let's say for Line C as an example, we have something called the VIP pass, right? And you pay for it, and it gives you no ads across all the games, right? That is something that's actually useful. Now, let's say I have a sword that I take from game A to game B and to game C and game D from all these different developers. That equation becomes a lot more complex to manage, right? How do you make sure it's valuable from, in each of these games? How do you make sure it's not overpowered? And I think from that, it's going to take some really great developers, people who are way smarter than me, to figure out how to solve that problem. And so I would look at it like fire. Or like a sword, actually, double-edged. There's good and there's bad. So that would be my answer back to that question.
Yeah, I can maybe piggyback off that a little bit. So, Raf, similar to you, me and some friends are building a game as like a learning experience. I think to really like understand the space, you have to build. And like the game I'm building, like we're putting interoperability in it with other, larger NFT collections, but there's kind of nothing intrinsic about it. So like if you own a Bored Ape, we're basically just identifying you have that in your wallet. But anything from a game design standpoint, like ours is like a car battling game. So like all of the actual abilities have to kind of be coded from scratch to give some like bespoke usage to that asset. So I do think there's something to be said for the strategy of like, what is the most sort of like how can you make generic interoperable solutions to where, it's more than just like an identifier of like, okay, yes, the person owns that thing. Now it's on the developer to add all the functionality to give it interoperability.
One, like, should you? I mean, I think that's the thing we're going to see is over the long arc, where do you need, is that something that's actually demanded by the players? And I guess we'll see.
Nobody's done it, I think, cool enough in ways that demands it today, outside of maybe like the past that I talked to you about previously, right? And actually, you kind of see a form of it in Apple Arcade, right? You buy one pass and you get access to thousands of games, right? Or maybe even tens of thousands. Just actually, double clicking on that topic, something that I think is really interesting there is that on the interoperability side, I think it's really going to come down to the games that actually integrate it, even within a certain, like let's say Activision is an example. They decide they want to have a gun that's usable across multiple games. They've actually done that with Call of Duty. If you think about it, you can play Modern Warfare, and then you can actually go play their multiplayer version and take the guns that you progressed in one game to another. That's been done really well. And so I think what you're going to see is that within the developer itself, within their developer account and their family of apps, they can probably do it well. But once you break out to different developers and different apps outside of that developer, I think that's when it's going to become a lot trickier to manage.
Yeah, and Raf, I love your, my main thesis is, Andrew, is a little different than yours for like the near-term value of interoperability. I think it's more valuable as like a marketing hook. So it's not so much that someone who owns the asset is demanding other interoperable functionality. And Raf, I'd love your take on this, but like I think there's a lot of power in almost using interoperability as a targeting mechanism. So if you know that like your ideal audience, has a high overlap with owning a collection of, cyberkongs or whatever, then providing an incentive and gating, if someone owns that, can give you kind of a nice hook for targeting and bringing that player base into your game.
Yep, completely agree.
So one question or thought I had was just, what is adoption looking like from your guys' perspective so far, and how are the trends that we've seen in terms of FTX and stuff exploding affecting the adoption and the interest that developers have in Web3 Vessel, this whole ecosystem?
And
Raf, maybe you can start with just your take on like, adoption of the segment overall, and then drill into Vessel specifically.
So on our side, adoption has been good. A lot of developers see the value of integrating a marketplace within their application because they've seen the value on web and even console games as well. I think FTX has affected us is really not any at all, because we're not dealing with cryptocurrencies. We're not dealing with speculative buyers. On Vessel, all the transactions that we see, it's among the consumers that are playing the game itself. And in fact, in almost all of our integrations, we don't even use the word NFT. And so a lot of people who are interacting with Vessel, they don't look at it as, hey, I'm buying an NFT. They just look, oh, this is a digital collectible and I can resell it to other players. And that's cool, right? And there's a limited amount of them.
What about from the perspective of game developers? That's sort of where I meant to ask the question. It's like, I mean, we've seen some amount of interest wane on the Web3 side, not a huge amount. And I'm curious if that's reflective in your guys, what you've seen so far as you bring this product to market.
Yeah, so a lot of developers, I'd say that even I talked to today about Vessel, have this preconceived notion that Vessel is this NFT marketplace that's focused on Web3, and for us, it's not. And so I would say from that perspective, if developers don't get off that mindset, then those conversations go dead pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But when kind of the quick thing I tell developers, we're the Steam marketplace for mobile games and apps tech, right? And developers get that. And so for us, we've seen developers who are interested in that type of monetization in their apps. They're moving very quickly. We've got some big apps that are going to be going live before the end of this year and heading into Q1 that you'll see that I would say are going to do really good justice showing the power of marketplace monetization in their games.
On that note, Raf, is it fair to say that kind of the thesis of this era of Vessel is not so much that you're building something targeting Web3 gamers, but more something targeting the existing gaming industry, both developers and players, with the idea of adding a value proposition that benefits both, but more for a mainstream player base? Correct.
We're building for the gamers themselves, people who are inside of the application, building a marketplace for them. We're not building for the stock trader or the speculator to come in there and buy these assets and try to mark them up, an exorbitant amount. The way I would look at it, similar, going back to my Steam analogy, like, people trade on the Steam marketplace skins for, let's say, or for CSGO. but the intent isn't actually to, it be your living, right? You're not going to make a living selling CS skins, most likely. 99% of people can't do that. And so same mindset for vessel users, right? If they can even get something back on their purchase, they're happy. And if they make profit, great, but it's not the main intent.
Right. I think that's a really important point, and something I harp on a lot is to separate out the idea of collectible digital assets from the idea of a return or yield. It's almost like we started the segment with the wrong thesis of play to earn. I mean, if we think about the history of in-app purchase in gaming, it's quite normalized that any in-game item you buy is instantly and forever an ROI of exactly 0. And we've just normalized that. So there's kind of an unrealistic expectation due to the boom of Axie and early Web3 projects that blew up, that I'm going to buy this thing and it's going to be worth more than I bought it. I think that's totally the wrong thesis. And it's not a thesis that we applied to any other collectible as sort of like an assumption of increased value over time as a default.
Well, and to be clear, that was a feature, not a bug. Most of everything post Axie until basically a month ago, not everything, 90% of it, they all touted that as a core feature. You buy NFT, number go up, you get money. And so like in the same way that we've conditioned people to expect IPs to be worth 0, the play to earn ecosystem has conditioned people to expect NFTs to increase in value. And neither of those are the right outcome. But it is what it is. There's a logical line of the train of thought as to why we got here.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that was sort of the early messaging. And on the contrary to just the power of the novelty of digital collectibles, I think an anecdote that I want to share from the last few days is, in the FTX fallout, I was on like a gaming Reddit and everyone was talking trash and talking about how this was like evidence that NFTs are scams. And like half the people in the thread literally had the Reddit NFT avatar that they don't call an NFT, that they just refer to as digital collectibles. And I think these people are literally unaware that that the thing that they have representing them in this digital ecosystem is the thing that they're trashing, because it's just a branding issue at the end of the day. People like the functionality, they find it compelling and fun. They just don't like the image associated and the branding that that Web3 and all things crypto have kind of rightly earned due to the bad actors.
100%, 100%. And we've seen a lot of MMORPGs. Trading items through like an auction house or through a marketplace is an integral part of the game. Actually, a large reason why engaged players even play more and invest more time. And so seeing that go to effectively different products in the ecosystem, gaming and non-gaming, I think is just a natural evolution. Sadly, the narrative with NFTs has been tainted, but I think you're going to see a lot more adoption of this technology and also a rebrand as well.
You sort of floated something interesting there, which is gaming and non-gaming. Are you seeing many non-game applications which are looking for digital asset usage that you're on the Vessel platform? Are you seeing any interesting potential use cases there down the line?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of developers talk to us about interesting ideas. Memberships is one. Another one is actually like there's an in-app contest, right? Users vote on, let's say, what's the best photo, and then effectively when that contest is over, the developer or the user gets a 1 out of 1 badge where they can show on their profile. Within that community, it shows that they're a contest winner. And that also badge has functionality where, they can get, higher ranking on the search results. They can give themselves a spotlight on their content. So that's an example of one.
Raf, one thing I'd love to explore next is, it seems clear that you have a compelling proof of concept with Vessel. And, obviously like AppLovin is a company very focused on the growth of apps. What are you thinking for kind of the adoption strategy for the player base of people in the Vessel ecosystem? Is that something that you're thinking about yet? Or are you still a little more in the proof of concept phase? Like we'll figure that out down the road. Like how do you plan to scale the user base?
Yeah, so I think it all, starting from first principles, if we give people a really fast and easy experience for them to trade their items, and it's all powered by Vessel, then by default, we will grow as well. And so that's the approach we're taking on our end. And it's really not more complex than that. So every day we're really just optimizing our product to make it easier for developers to go trade, for users to trade amongst each other and delivering a better user experience. And we're seeing growth with that. I would say we're not in the mode of just rocket ship growth yet. But when we are ready, we'll have what I think a close to near optimal product. We have a lot of work to do to get there, though.
So maybe a comparison to another arm of the AppLovin family, Max Ads, the mediation and monetization platform. So maybe sort of like rhyming with the thesis for that part of the business, which is like, if this product helps games and game developers to monetize better, that will intrinsically power the growth of each of those games separately, and they can grow on their own. Or am I projecting a bit here?
I think, just to add on that, the only thing I would say is that if it increases monetization, helps the games grow, other developers in the ecosystem will look at what that developer is using, and if Max is a key part of that, then themselves will actually use Max too. So like the reason why Max has been able to get such wide adoption within the market, and I think is the #1 mediation, really just comes down to it is just the better solution compared to everything else out there.
Yeah, so it sounds like the growth strategy is really product focused growth as opposed to the growth that we do, which is drive a bunch of users into an app.
Exactly.
I sort of,
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Xander. Yeah, I was wondering next if we could go to just sort of what you see. Let's look into the future a bit. What are some of the more compelling ways that you see games using ownable assets that we haven't seen yet? Like, what are some things that you're excited about that maybe you've seen proof of concept from other developers, or you think could be done but that people aren't doing yet?
Good question.
I would say right now, we're not really interested, or we're not focused on out of the box type of integrations. Instead, what I really focus on is making sure the integrations that we are going live in are done well. And so like, I think actually a perfect way to kind of frame that is a developer may go say, hey, I want to throw digital items in the game that can be sold, right? Let's call it, NFTs effectively. So NFTs, we'll make them, have the capability to unlock let's just say all the content side of a game if you buy one. The problem with this type of integration is that if you can get that same exact value add through traditional in-app purchase, then you will see no change in behavior.
Right.
And so what we're really focused on is telling developers, okay, if you're going to integrate Vessel and you're going to introduce NFTs to your game, focus on a whole different other value add outside of your IEP economy. And what we see in more cases than not is when we focus on that, that's when we see the biggest lifts delivered to developers. Right. And it doesn't mean that they have to be super outlandish integrations, right? So like an example is this, like coins, hearts, that should be an IEP, right? That should never be an NFT. It doesn't make sense, right? There should be an infinite amount of them. These are just consumables. Now, on the other hand, like if you look at like a badge that only like 5 to 10% of your user base can have, right? And you want to have a limited amount of them. That is completely different value add than what a traditional IEP would offer.
Right. And it's more focused on the uniqueness is the value in that experience versus something where it's like a utility, like a coin.
Well, yeah. It's you combine utility, uniqueness, and also just scarcity.
Right. And that's
right?
what the whole point of an NFT is, scarcity.
And even just like more basic, right? We saw this in the evolution of games, right? So like you had just like one currency in a game, gold. And then, Kabam came out and said, hey, well, why don't we have a soft currency and a hard currency? And, some games probably took it a little extreme. They released like, 4 or 5 different currencies in the game. Us, obviously, we're not trying to do that, but we look at it as like a incremental part of a game's economy and focusing on the unique value adds it can deliver to that game. That isn't captured through traditional IEPs today.
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point, Raf, which is that, Xander, back to your point earlier of we had so many games essentially copy the Axie model and have token-driven economies in their game, but there's a real risk to that, which is when the token, it's also a default that the token is also usually tied to the fundraising model for the game company. So you often have this backlog of investors that are just looking to dump the token that's part of your in-game economy and has this huge negative force. So one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is, is that just another default assumption that Web3 gaming got totally wrong from the start, that like your in-game currency should also be something tradable on an open market. I think it definitely am to the point where I don't think it's a necessary And it's cool to see that, you know, that Vessel's design is, you know, kind of contrary to that. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. We still don't have any like proof of concept of a long-term sustainable model of a game operating off of a tradable, you know, fluctuating in-game token.
Question, just really quick. Can you do a token in Vessel? Like if I wanted to create a currency within Vessel and call it, you know,
No,
orc token, can I do that? What if I
no.
just printed a bajillion, like, you know, can I just print as many as I want, right? Like it seems in theory, like it wouldn't be impossible unless you
I
guys
mean,
are hard coding against it.
you could indirectly do it, right? So we would let you like go. I mean, when you say token in terms of NFT, yes, right? And so you could say inside of your game that, hey, I need 10 orc NFTs to be able to play this level or play this, unlock this content. So yes, you could do it indirectly.
It'd be like hacking around the system though.
Well, I mean, Raf, I think the delineation is you can create non-fungible tokens, but you can't create a fungible token.
Well, I mean,
right?
I think so. I mean, yes, but I also like going back to, you know, earlier, which is like, what is the value in that, right? Like you're effectively offering the same thing that you would get through an in-app purchase, right? Like why would you use an NFT and add all these steps, you know, just say, okay, I need 10 of these orc NFTs to go play this level. Why not just say, hey, I'm going to buy 10 gems, right? Or 10 coins. It's just not an efficient use of the technology to do that, right? I feel like that's the problem, is that people are trying to take a square and go shove it into circle holes, right?
Right.
And it just, with that, you're going to see low user adoption, hence what you've seen in a lot of these Web3 games.
Yeah, I just imagine that there'll be some bad actors who see some way to loop in the system that they think they can generate by doing something like that. I mean, I'm sure you guys are thinking about that already and going to need to keep an eye on it. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, which is that basically by design, the system does not allow for that.
Well, I mean, I think you could apply that same criticism to any economy with ownable assets. I think, you know, I'm a huge bull on that as a game design lever, but I think that's, once you add a financial incentive or opportunity for financial incentive to any game economic model, it really also incentivizes people to find exploits for that. So yeah, I think that's just something that we're going to see the whole sector have as an additional thing that we have to think about as we build in it.
Yeah, 100%. And for us, you know, if we see malicious integrations go live that aren't healthy for the consumer or in just the ecosystem, then yeah, we'll make sure to police them and shut them down.
Yeah, makes sense. So zooming all the way out, what advice do you have for developers who are looking to adopt Web3 technology or Vessel specifically in the coming months and years? And sort of, yeah, phase two, like, do we need to consider outside forces such as government, or is it just like, you know, we kind of take it day by day? But first, like, what's the, yeah. What do you think?
For Vessel, what I can tell you is that you don't have to worry about, from my thoughts today, obviously this could change, we could see. I don't think you really have to worry about any government regulation because it's just a virtual currency, right? We are piggybacking on the laws that have already existed for a long time. Now, laws could come out to change how virtual currency can be used and so on, but we're not trading security here. And so we fall out of that bucket, right? That's actually one of the benefits we can scale globally. We don't have to worry about the securities laws that tokens typically have to. And then how would I, you know, the advice I would give developers on, you know, how to use Vessel, it sounds boring, but it's really from a first personalist perspective, which is how could integrating a digital asset that has a limited quantity that can be unique add additional value to my game, right? And so like how we did it in Match 3D, which is like an integration we talk about all the time, was users could compete for a badge that gave them in-game utility. And there's a limited amount of them. And what we see is that the most engaged players, they trade these items, or they trade the badge amongst each other a lot. We see a lot of, also a lot of engagement from users in the pro tournament, way higher than we traditionally do for this type of item because there's a limited amount of them. And it gives people a better way to express themselves in the game and status. And so like specifically for Match 3D, the badge is actually used, what we see in the Facebook community, as a way to recruit other players. So, you know, just for context, this NFT we're talking about is a pro badge. And the pro badge, if you win it, allows you to get a star multiplier without watching rewarded video ads. And within the leaderboards, it says you're a pro effectively. And so what we see is that users take that clout, that status, to be able to get more players into their team and to go higher in the leaderboards, right? And that, I think, is a really good integration.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's very insightful, Raf. I think one other topic I want to touch on, make sure just a little bit, is on that topic of advice is, I talk to a lot of developers that are thinking about dipping their toe into Web3, and they're really scared of Apple and Google policy and how that's going to potentially affect them. Anything else that you've learned in making, what is, potentially a very large and ambitious platform, in advice you would share for people developing that want to be in this early era, but are kind of afraid of the blowback from Apple and Google, or how that could affect them?
Yeah, so, my number one feedback, follow the developer guidelines. And obviously it sounds pretty straightforward, but that's really it, right? Apple wants to, and Google want to make sure that these NFTs are being integrated in a way that actually delivers a good user experience, where a user doesn't get scammed, or falls into a trap that they think they're going to buy a digital item for $1,000, and in one day it's going to be worth $100,000, when in reality it's worth a penny. So if I had to say something else besides following the developer lines, just really focus on delivering a great user experience, right?
Yeah.
If your users are saying, wow, these NFTs are amazing, and it's really a seamless experience for the consumer, you're going to be in a way better place than if Apple were to call you one day and they're like, hey, we see a bunch of 1-star reviews. Users are saying, I'm getting scammed by these NFTs. I'm losing a ton of money. It's just not a good place to have. It's not a good place to be when having those types of conversations.
Right. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. And that's one reason, we really wanted to highlight what your team has done with Vessel. Is we're big proponents of, like, if you're going to be early, be willing to do this the hard way. Some of the partners we work with, like Axie, they can't sneak through in submissions, nor would we recommend that strategy. And I think it's great that we're starting to see proofs of concept with major companies like AppLovin bringing a large product like Vessel, where it's done out in the open. We don't love every policy that Apple has and Google has having to do with Web3. These will probably change over time, but there's a conversation now. And platforms like Vessel are showing a proof of concept that you can make something that's in compliance. And there is a way that Apple will work with Web3 related developers and products. It might not be exactly what we want today, but at least we can move the conversation forward. So I really appreciate you digging into Vessel with us this week, Raf. And I think it's been very insightful to kind of unpack the path to market and the future of Vessel.
No worries. And yeah, I've had a lot of fun talking about Vessel with you guys.
Awesome. Yeah. The rules to make sure that you're compliant are make sure you pay Apple, and turns out that still works. Cool. So
and deliver good user experience. Throw that in there.
Okay, so we have a little sign off section. We call it App of the Week, where we just each talk about briefly about an app that we've been using recently. We'll start with Warren, so you can see how it's done. Warren, do you have an app this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a fun one this week, and it's sort of right at this intersection of some of the topics that we've been talking about. I'm curious actually if it's on Raf's radar. It's a little gaming platform called Tally Up, and it's like I call it, they describe themselves as like a massive multiplayer game show. And it does have Web3 elements to it. So the way you play Tally Up is it's all their revenue is driven from ads, and basically when you download the app, they give you the equivalent of 2 cents. And then you can battle in these, I call them like WarioWare-esque mini games against other players. And if you win, you kind of move up the battle and you go from playing for 2 cents to playing for 4 cents. If you win again, you play for 8 cents. So you're kind of, you're climbing this ladder, and there's always kind of this this dangle of like playing for larger stakes against tougher opponents. And if you completely kind of crap out and lose your starting funds, you basically have things you can do to generate another couple cents of income and start up the ladder again. But there are these fun little like casual mini games. And it's at the intersection of, I think, probably a lot of things that Ralph, I'm sure you and your team are familiar with, of casual and hyper casual gaming, and integrating ownable assets and potential earnable virtual currencies that can be backed up to real world earnings. So just curious if this is, Xander, I showed this to you yesterday, but curious if you guys have checked this out, if you have any thoughts on it.
I haven't checked it out. My number one question to you is, have you won?
Yeah, I'm big time. I'm up to 8 cents now. So
Oh
yeah,
man, nice.
yeah, I'm thinking about quitting Uptick. I just got to get a little higher on the ladder.
Money. Awesome. Raph, what about you? Do you have an app this week?
Yeah, so I may cheat and say one productive app and one vice app. So productive, I'd say Blinkist. Blinkist is for people like me who don't have the attention span to go read a whole book. Blinkist does a really good job of summarizing really key points inside of a book. And so I really use it, when I have a few minutes of downtime here and there, and I can walk away with really good tidbits of knowledge. So highly would recommend that from a productive side. On the fun side, I'm late to the party, but I just started checking out Marvel Snap. I really enjoy it. It's a simple, really fast-paced card game. And so, yeah, those would be my 2 apps for the week.
Interesting. I keep hearing about Marvel Snap. I know they like spend $1 bajillion in UA. Maybe I'll check it out. It's good? Recommend playing?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're gonna say something?
No, I was gonna say, I think I have been meaning to check it out too, Xander. And I think like I'm seeing a lot of like the CCG kind of influencers and streamers get pretty into it. So I know you and I are both pretty into that genre. So
maybe it's better we don't play it. We're both more and
I think you should play it. The thing I would say to you is like, I'm watching it from a video, to be honest with you, it looks super confusing and not fun at all. But it's, when I was playing it, I was like, why would anyone play this? And then I'm like, oh man, I guess I'm gonna play another level.
Why am I still playing this?
Yeah, right.
Why am I still playing it?
Yeah, 4 hours later, I'm like still playing it, right? And so they definitely take a new take, and I think there's good things to learn from it. And if you're a CCG guy, you're definitely gonna kick some ass at the game. So definitely give it a go.
Sold. Awesome. So my app this week is somewhat in the vein of Blinkist, which is I've been in the search for better quality news. I became a subscriber to The Economist last week, and I started using The Economist app. And it's really, really good just in terms of high quality journalism. You get the weekly articles delivered digitally. And I do a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and they have basically, narration, high quality narration for many of their articles. So, I haven't quite jumped over the hump of buying the physical Economist. I thought about it. It's kind of expensive. I need to raise more so I can afford The Economist. But definitely recommend checking out The Economist app if you are interested in high quality journalism.
Xander,
is it better than Twitter?
I use them both. So I'll say it's very, very different than Twitter.
I'm just saying, Xander, you're on a really good streak of like old man apps for the last month or two.
I think I ran out of apps after the first 6 months of this podcast. Awesome. Well, Raph, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate having you on, talking about Vessel, getting some AppLovin perspective. I know we talk about AppLovin a lot, so it's good to get the other side of the equation from you. If anyone wants to learn more about Vessel, AppLovin, or get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, they can email me at rafael@applovin.com, openvessel.io. Is our site. You can reach us there, and we'd love to chat. We got a team, and we're scaling quickly, and have a lot of exciting stuff coming out in the future.
Awesome. Warren, want to take us out?
Yeah, thanks again, Raph. I mean, it's great to talk to yourself and a team that's thinking about so many of the problems at the intersection of Web3 and traditional gaming. And I think this was pretty eye-opening conversation, and it's great to get some learnings from what your team has done and the progress you've made. So thanks again for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and as always, the pod is brought to you by the folks here at Upptic. So here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow in a profitable, sustainable way, and we really have a mix of traditional and Web3 games in our games in our portfolio. So this is a mix of both the people to do the work around growth marketing and UA and Web3 native marketing, as well as creative, as well as predictive analytics. And when you work with us, it also unlocks the Upptic platform, which has some really cool predictive analytics and UA tools that allow us to do our work more effectively with you. So if you're building a great game, reach out to us. We love to talk to developers and see if we can be of any service. And you can reach us at upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Talk soon.